Well, this week's reading, February 17th, from Living Wisely, Living Well by Swami Kriyanandaji. Listen for expressions of truth in the simple speech of children. See what you can learn from them. Their insights are less conditioned by convention and often are refreshingly perceptive. Be careful, however, not to be so childlike as to create trouble for others. To give an amusing but illustrative example, during my family's visit to America when I was 9, my mother took us 3 boys across the border into Canada. As we returned through customs, the officer asked her, "Have you anything to declare?" "Nothing," she replied. Instantly, all 3 of us, hands over our mouths, cried out, "Oh, Mother!" Sternly, the official ordered her to open the trunk. There he found 3 little birch bark canoes, 6 inches long. So, be childlike, but don't be naive. This is a beautiful reading from Swamiji, and he often talked about this concept of being childlike, but not being childish. And childlike is, I would say, the higher octave of this childlike quality. Childish is the lower octave of it. And so often his Guru, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, talked about being more childlike. He told his disciples to be like children. He often quoted Jesus Christ, "Suffer little children to come unto me, for such is the kingdom of heaven." And so this childlike attitude of the devotee is truly essential for real divine awakening. Something Swamiji says here, one of the reasons, he says, insights are less conditioned by convention in children. And so you will find that if you have a childlike attitude of wonder, of awe, of simplicity, and lose the adult qualities, which I hate to call them adult qualities because they're really not truly adult, but the qualities of sarcasm, cynicism, worldliness, "Oh, I've done this before." One example is when you sit down to meditate. Feel like you're doing it for the first time. If you remember, maybe the first several times you ever sat down to meditate, you had this anticipation of doing something very new. And sometimes we get into ruts in life and bad habits, and you may sit down to meditate and you think, "Oh, I've had many restless meditations lately, this is probably going to be just one more," and you set yourself up for failure by doing that and having that attitude. So try to have a more childlike attitude of seeing things for the first time. You see this in children. Even if they've done something before, they still have this appreciation of the newness and the uniqueness of every moment in life, because every moment is unique. It's not the same, even though it's similar in many ways. But even then, if you have this attitude of "I'm doing this for the first time," and have the anticipation and the wonder and the awe, sitting down to meditate, for example, as if you're doing it for the first time, you will find that you can get much more out of it. There's a Zen Buddhist teacher who called this approach beginner's mind, meaning always act like you are a beginner in these things. And you will find that your perceptions, again, as Swamiji says, are not conditioned by past experience, by convention, by what you are supposed to be experiencing. Now, childlike does not mean small and weak. Childlike is a different quality than that when we talk about it in the divine sense. Paramahansa Yoganandaji once told his disciples, he said, "If only you knew whose son you are and how much territory you own, you would give up everything else." And so he was saying that we are children of the infinite. There's a beautiful story of a disciple of Yoganandaji. He was giving a lecture, and afterwards he was greeting people outside the hall. And this woman introduced herself to him, and she said, "Hello, my name is so-and-so, and my father is the President of the United States." In fact, she was the daughter of the President of the United States, and she was obviously a little bit proud of that fact. And this disciple of Master, he said, "Greetings, my name is Brother Turiyananda, and my father is the Lord of the universe." And he had a very childlike attitude just to come up with a thought like that. In fact, he also was a very powerful, strong man. He had an extraordinarily strong will and a strong body, but he also had this childlike attitude of joy and humor in all things. I met him several times, and he just had this delightful, childlike, humorous attitude, seeing the humor and the joy in all of life, both good and bad, to demonstrate how powerful a childlike attitude can be. We look at the life of the young Paramahansa Yoganandaji when he was a child. He was a young Mukunda, and there's a very strange story told about him by his family. His family was visiting a home in Bareilly, and the father got called away for some very urgent business. He had to be back in Kolkata immediately or within 7 days. And suddenly, right when they heard that news, a cyclone came in. And it started raining, it started pouring, it started flooding. And the weather reports said that this cyclone was going to make travel and getting away, even a short distance away, impossible for 14 days. That's how big of a storm it was. And young Mukunda was very concerned about his father missing his important meeting. So he decided to do something about it. Now you ask, what could a child do about a cyclone? You'd think a very practical child would think of getting a boat or something material like that. Well, young Mukunda, he asked his brother to get him some newspapers. And young Mukunda got the newspapers, and he sat down next to this flooded area where the water was coming in from a lake or a pond. And he started making, out of the newspaper, he would fold each piece of newspaper into a little paper boat. And he would put the boat on the water, push it away, and his brothers could hear him muttering some mantra under his breath as he would push the boat away. He would take another piece of newspaper, fold it up into a boat, push it into the water, and say a mantra. He did this repeatedly, over and over again. And his family, his brothers and sisters, were looking at him like he was completely crazy, as if, what are you doing with these little boats and this mantra, you silly child, or you crazy child? And after he did this for about half an hour and sent a lot of these boats with a lot of mantras away, suddenly the sky started clearing. The skies completely opened up. The rain stopped altogether, and the storm completely went away. Now, isn't that a strange story? This childlike approach, yet with an extraordinary power behind it. And this really is when the child is not childish, but as the child of God, the child of the infinite, understands who and what its parents are, where it comes from, understands, as Yoganandaji says, how much territory you own. He wasn't talking about physical territory, he was talking about owning the entire universe. All of space, all energy, all power. And so this is the childlike attitude to take towards life. Now obviously we're not all great avatars or masters, and if we were to take little paper boats and send them out with mantras, they might not have that effect. But to the extent that we stop identifying with this little self, with our separation from the infinite, from which we were born, as long as we have that separation and limit ourselves, then yes, we will not be able to do such things. But to the extent that we, every day when we can, in meditation, in prayer, in thought, in affirmation, turn our identity away from this little self to being a child of the infinite and having what Yoganandaji often called our divine birthright. He would say often, reclaim your divine birthright of infinite bliss, infinite joy, infinite divine freedom, success, prosperity, health. All these things are the divine birthright of the child of God. And so affirm this in meditation, not just as an affirmation, but simply the act of meditation. Really, that's truly what it is. By looking up at the spiritual eye, by gazing up into the infinite, by offering ourselves with devotion and self-offering into that light of God, we first reach that point, as Patanjali talked about in his Eightfold Path, of first concentration, then absorption in some aspect of the divine, and then finally union with that aspect of the divine. And that really is how we reclaim our divine birthright, is simply by going within in meditation and really tuning in, offering ourselves back into it and understanding that. The way Jesus Christ also put it, he said, "Thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes." And Swami Kriyanandaji interprets that by saying, the fact is, the childlike devotee who opens his heart to God, especially in meditation, finds himself filled with a love so exquisite that doubt of the divine goodness can simply no longer exist. Beholding the universe with transformed vision, he recognizes a higher destiny for all creatures than the fleeting fulfillments of earthly life. And you see this with the great saints, that many of them had a very childlike quality to them, if not a childlike attitude, yet also had the deepest wisdom. Anandamayi Ma is a great example. Swami Kriyanandaji describes his times with her, and he said that she was just like a child at times in her expressions, in her manners, in her laughter, the way she might tease someone, and just enjoyed this existence here as a child of the infinite. Yet at the same time, pundits would come to her to try to solve very difficult challenges they had in interpreting a certain scripture, because she had the greatest and deepest wisdom. One time Swamiji pointed out the reason for this. He said that only with pure love and devotion can we achieve and reach that unitive state of consciousness, union with God, from which all true spiritual depth and true wisdom comes from. And so this childlike attitude of a saint like Anandamayi Ma, one with the infinite, recognizing who her father and her mother were, and she was the child and had the divine birthright, she had reclaimed it. And even the greatest wisdom comes from that divine attitude. Swamiji also talks about something that Yoganandaji said. Again, talking about the attitude that a true spiritual devotee should have in order to gain the greatest freedom. As Swamiji writes in the biography that he wrote of Yoganandaji, always throughout his life, Mukunda, the young Yogananda, tried to get people to understand that God is not some mere abstraction. Though the Lord has created billions of universes, he is also very human in the way he relates to his human children, and he likes above all to see in them an attitude of childlike trust. One time, many years later, and not long before his death, Mukunda, who by that time was known by his monastic name, Paramhansa Yogananda, spoke of one of his disciples, Horace Gray, a very simple monk who found it difficult even to speak. He was spastic. Quote, "Horace will get there in this life," the master remarked. "His devotion has pleased God." Another disciple, trying to reconcile this prediction with Horace as he knew him, remarked, "But it must be a very simple kind of devotion, isn't it, sir?" With a blissful smile, the master replied, "Ah, that is the kind which pleases God." And I'm going to go on to tomorrow's reading from Living Wisely, Living Well. I hope I'm not spoiling your anticipation for reading it tomorrow. It is, "Speak the truth kindly, never in a judgmental spirit, and never sarcastically. Speak it to be helpful, not to destroy another person's self-confidence." And this relates to the reading from today. You will find that children up to a certain age are never sarcastic. They do speak kindly. And you'll find that sarcasm and cynicism and those kinds of biting comments are something that is acquired from worldliness, from perhaps being beat up by the world. It's also acquired by imitating adults. You will find that teenagers especially very often will take on a very sarcastic, cynical way of speaking and behaving because they're trying to look more mature. They're trying to look like they are adults. And they are reaching a certain age where they may look down on this childlike attitude that the younger ones have. And they see maturity as expressing those qualities. And how mistaken they really are, because true maturity, in the spiritual sense, understands, as the great ones are teaching us here, that the childlike attitude, free of cynicism and sarcasm, are truly the spiritual heights and are the hallmark of great saints. Now, Swamiji also writes here about speaking the truth kindly. Swamiji spoke about kindness as a truly divine quality. Again, you can see this in small children who are sharing and giving to each other. Sometimes you see the other side of being selfish and thinking of themselves, but you see it very strongly sometimes in children. And this quality of kindness, Swamiji spoke of it so highly that near the end of his life, somebody reminded him of the story of Paramhansa Yoganandaji, who, near the end of his life, he was asked, "What will we do when you are gone?" There was one of his disciples. And the master replied, "When I am gone, only love can take my place." And Swami Kriyanandaji, near the end of his life, somebody was interviewing him and asked him, told him the story, reminded him of the story of his guru. And they asked Swamiji, "When you are gone, can you tell us what can take your place?" And he was very thoughtful about it for a few moments. And he said, "Kindness," was the answer. You would have thought something grandiose and great. And it was very simple, and it was the divine child speaking in him in a way. And he remarked that the hallmark of Ananda and Ananda people in the highest sense is a quality of kindness and giving to others. And he told a story that he found very, very touching. Very simple story, but touched him very deeply. And it was very moving to him when he heard it, which is that somebody visited our ashram, Ananda Village in California, where we have about 250 people living there. And they remarked that they were struck so strongly by the fact that every single person that they met was extraordinarily kind. And they, first time, maybe the first person, they thought it was just that person, but after a while they understood that practicing meditation, practicing seva, practicing devotion, and all these things that we teach and practice here at Ananda, that one starts naturally developing this quality of kindness. And almost I would say that you don't really develop any quality that is divine. It's more that you start losing the particular qualities of worldliness and hurt and selfishness that have covered over those divine qualities. So we don't develop kindness. We just start losing the mud of worldliness that is covering the gold of that divine child that is underneath the mud. And essentially that's, again, divine awakening is not achieving anything. It's really just uncovering the mud, as I've said, covering the gold of the divine one with the infinite that's underneath, inside all of us, truly. Swamiji, I'm going to close and I'm going to end a little bit early here. And this is a beautiful reading, or a passage from Swamiji. And it's about religion. Because religion, you will find religion can tend to get very intellectual. It can get very dry. There are a lot of words expressed in the name of religion, a lot of complexity. The topic this evening is truth is simple, everything else is complex. And you'll find that many spokespeople of religions really overcomplicate things, when in fact it really is very simple. True divine truth is very simple. It's only the worldly explanations, and some people in charge of religions can be very worldly in their attitudes and approach. I've heard a good definition and a comparison that there's religion and there is spirituality. And religion is more the form, the outward expression. Spirituality is the true inner experience of these things. Swami Kriyanandaji, one time, I think he was eating at a restaurant or somewhere, and he met a young man who they befriended each other, and they were talking, and the man asked Swamiji, "What do you do?" And he explained that he teaches meditation, yoga. He's a disciple of a great master. And this young man said to Swamiji, with some perhaps regret, he said, "Well, I'm not very religious." And Swamiji's response was very, very beautiful. He just smiled. He said, "I'm not very religious either." And he was talking about the structure of religion. Obviously, he was very spiritual. He was a saint, a great, great saint. He had this understanding of and recognition of being a child and one with the infinite. But it wasn't the form and the outward expression of religion and church and dogma that he was really all that interested in. It was helping each and every person become a child of the infinite. And I'll close with something Swamiji says about religion and sort of the sad direction that much of religion has gone in the world. You see it more and more with the strife between different religions and violence and hatred and sectarianism. And here Swamiji really gives the answer to that problem. He writes, "What matters in religion is not the outer place of worship, nor the outer rituals, nor even the particular system of beliefs, which are, after all, only definitions formulated by human beings, but a person's own direct, actual inner experience of God and truth is what matters. According to every saint who has experienced this sublime awakening, God is simple, man is complex. The demands of truth are that religion become simple once again. Religion must return to the fundamental reality, divine love. It must return to man's need for direct, personal experience of that love. Divine work is not converting others. It is living and expressing divine love. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.